In the unforgiving heat of the Wyoming Territory, 1883, love wasn't about flowers or poetry. It was about who would bleed for you when the devil came knocking. Sabrina Jenkins thought she was running from a past that wanted her dead, but she never expected the desert itself to strike first. When a diamondback rattler sunk its fangs into her leg, the rough-edged cowboy guiding her, Cedric Bridger, had to make a choice that defied logic and flirted with death. This isn't just a story about survival. It is a brutal, honest look at how two strangers became soulmates in the shadow of the grave. Listen closely, this is the true story of the trail to Laramie. The sun over the red desert was not a celestial body. It was a hammer, beating the earth into a fine, choking powder that coated the back of the throat and made the eyes water. Cedric Bridger pulled the brim of his Stetson lower, his eyes scanning the horizon where the heat shimmer danced like ghosts. He didn't like the silence. In this part of the territory, silence meant something was holding its breath, waiting to strike. Behind him, the steady clop-clop of the bay mare told him Sabrina Jenkins was still in the saddle. She hadn't complained once in 3 days, despite the blisters he knew were forming on her hands and the raw chafing of a ride she wasn't built for. She was a city woman from Street, Louis, wearing a dress that had once been a respectable blue serge but was now gray with the trail. She carried herself with a stiffness that spoke of pride, or perhaps fear. Cedric knew it was fear. He just didn't know what she was scared of yet. "We'll water the horses at Rattlesnake Creek," Cedric called back, his voice gravelly from the dust. "Ain't much of a creek this time of year, but it's wet. How much further to the railhead?" Sabrina's voice was thin, parched. 2 days hard riding, 3 if we don't kill the horses. Cedric slowed his gelding, a massive roan named Whiskey, as they approached a cluster of scrub oak and jagged sandstone rocks. This was the only shade for 20 miles. He swung down, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a heavy thud. He checked the Winchester in his scabbard habit, mostly, and then walked back to offer Sabrina a hand. She ignored it, sliding off the horse with a wince she tried to hide. "I can manage, Mr. Bridger. Suit yourself, Miss Jenkins." Cedric turned his back to loosen Whiskey's cinch. He was a man who preferred horses to people. Horses didn't lie, and they didn't pay you $50 to smuggle them across the territory without asking questions. He needed that money. The mortgage on his father's plot in Montana was overdue, and the bank was run by vultures. The sound was distinct. It wasn't the wind. It was a dry, hollow rattle, like beans shaking in a tin can, but vibrating with a malice that froze the blood. Cedric spun around, his hand flying to the Colt Peacemaker on his hip. It happened in the space between heartbeats. Sabrina had stepped toward the shade of a sandstone overhang, seeking relief. She never saw the coiled menace blending perfectly with the rust-colored dirt. "Don't move," Cedric roared, but it was too late. Sabrina jerked back, gasping, her foot slipping on loose shale. The timber rattlesnake, thick as a man's forearm, struck. It was a blur of motion, a whip-crack of muscle. The fangs buried themselves deep into the soft flesh of her calf, just above the top of her boot. Sabrina screamed, a sound that tore through the heavy heat. She stumbled backward, falling hard onto the gravel. Cedric fired. The bullet took the snake's head off clean, leaving the body thrashing violently in the dust. But the damage was done. He was at her side in 2 strides, dropping to his knees. Sabrina was clutching her leg, her face draining of color so fast it looked like porcelain. Her breathing came in short, terrified hitches. "Let me see," Cedric ordered, his voice surprisingly calm. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. He pushed her hands away. The dress was torn, but he ripped it further, exposing the wound. 2 puncture marks, dark and angry, oozed blood. The flesh around them was already beginning to swell, turning a sickly purple. Is it bad?" Sabrina whispered, her eyes wide, fixed on his face. She was searching for a lie, something to tell her she'd be fine. Cedric looked at the size of the snake's headless body. It was a big one, a mature male, full venom load. He looked at the distance to the nearest doctor. 2 days. She would be dead by sundown. It's bad, Cedric said, the truth tasting like ash in his mouth. I ain't gonna lie to you, Sabrina. It's real bad. She gripped his forearm, her nails digging into his skin. I can't die here. You don't understand. I can't die here. He'll win. Who will win? Cedric asked, pulling a knife from his belt. Don't let me die, she begged, ignoring the question. Cedric looked at the wound, then at the knife, then at her. He knew the medical books in the East said sucking the venom was dangerous, that it could rot the teeth or poison the healer if they had a cut in their mouth. He knew the old trail doctors said it was the only way to buy time. He looked at Sabrina. Really looked at her. Beneath the dirt and the fear, she had eyes the color of a stormy sky, fierce and intelligent. She wasn't just a job anymore, in the middle of nowhere, with the vultures likely circling soon. She was the only other living soul in his universe. Lay back, he commanded softly, and grit your teeth. This is gonna hurt like hell. Cedric didn't wait for her to argue. He unbuckled his belt, sliding it off in one fluid motion, and wrapped it tightly around her thigh, 4 inches above the bite. He cinched it down until the leather creaked and Sabrina cried out. Got to stop the flow, he muttered, mostly to himself. Keep the poison from hitting your heart. He took his knife. It was razor sharp. He kept it that way for skinning game, not women. He held the blade over the flame of a lucifer match for a few seconds, then wiped it clean. Look at the sky, Sabrina, he said, his voice rough. Don't look at me. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out to mix with the dust on her cheeks. Just do it. He made 2 small incisions over the puncture marks. Dark blood, mixed with the yellowish clear fluid of the venom, welled up instantly. Sabrina's body convulsed, a sharp intake of breath hissing through her teeth. Cedric bent down, placing his mouth over the wound. The taste was metallic, bitter, and vile. It tasted like copper and acid. He sucked hard, drawing the blood and venom out, then turned his head and spat the mixture onto the dry earth. He did it again. And again. The rhythm of it became the only thing in the world. Suck, spit, breathe. His own heart was hammering against his ribs. He had a split lip from a bar fight in Cheyenne a week ago, a small cut. Barely healed. If the venom got into his bloodstream, they could both be dead before the moon rose. He pushed the thought away. He was a gambling man. After what felt like an hour but was likely only 10 minutes, the blood coming from the wound began to look redder, less viscous. The swelling was angry, but it hadn't shot up her leg as fast as he feared. He sat back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. His tongue felt numb, a tingling sensation spreading through his lips. He hoped it was just the contact and not the absorption. Sabrina was lying limp against the saddlebags he'd propped behind her. She was shivering now, despite the 100-degree heat. The shock was setting in. Colt? She whispered. It was the first time she had used his first name. I'm here. He uncorked his canteen and lifted her head, dribbling water onto her cracked lips. Drink. You lose fluids. The fever takes you. She swallowed with difficulty. Did you get it all? Got enough, I reckon. Now we wait. He didn't tell her that the venom was likely already in her system, attacking her nerves and blood cells. He didn't tell her that the next 12 hours would be a descent into hell. He lifted her, she felt terrifyingly light, and moved her deeper into the shade of the overhang. He built a small fire, not for warmth, but to boil water to wash the wound properly. He used his own bandana, soaking it in the boiling water, and cleaned the incisions. By late afternoon, the swelling had encompassed her knee. Her skin was burning to the touch. The fever had arrived, riding a fast horse. Cedric sat beside her, his back against the rock, his Winchester across his lap. He watched the horizon. He watched her chest rise and fall. Cedric, she mumbled, her eyes moving rapidly behind closed lids. The ledger. Don't let him find the ledger. Cedric frowned. He leaned closer. What ledger, Sabrina? She thrashed, her hand flying out to grip his shirt. Her grip was weak, trembling. Sheriff Hatcher. He killed them. He killed them all. The name hit Cedric like a physical blow. Bo Hatcher, the marshal of Carbon County, a man with a reputation for efficiency and a badge that shone too bright for the darkness in his eyes. Cedric had ridden with Hatcher once, years ago, on a posse. He knew the man was a snake, worse than the one that bit Sabrina. "Sabrina," Cedric said urgently, shaking her shoulder gently. "Is Hatcher chasing you?" Her eyes snapped open, but they were glassy, unseeing. She looked right through him. "Can't you hear the hooves? He's coming to burn it." She slumped back into unconsciousness. Cedric looked out at the vast, empty desert. He had thought this was a simple escort job. Take a lady to the train station in Laramie because she had family trouble. $50, easy money. Now, he had a dying woman, a snakebite that might kill him too, and the realization that one of the most dangerous men in the territory was likely tracking their trail. He checked his revolver. 5 rounds. He checked the Winchester. 6 rounds. He looked at Sabrina's face. In the throes of fever, she looked innocent, beautiful, and doomed. He reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. His hand lingered there. "I ain't gonna let him take you, Sabrina Joe," he whispered. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He touched his lips. They were swollen. His vision blurred for a second before snapping back into focus. The venom. He shook his head violently. He couldn't go down. Not now. He stood up to check the horses, needing to move, needing to keep the blood pumping. As he walked toward Whiskey, he saw it. On the southern horizon, miles away, a thin wisp of dust rose against the blue sky. It wasn't the wind. It was riders. Moving fast, Cedric stared at the dust, his jaw setting into a hard line. He walked back to Sabrina, checked the tourniquet one last time, and sat down beside her, cocking the lever of his rifle. "Wake up, darlin'," he whispered to the unconscious woman. "The devil's here." The sun dipped below the jagged spine of the mountains, painting the sky in bruises of purple and blood orange. With the fading light, the heat of the red desert evaporated, replaced instantly by a biting, dry chill that gnawed at the bone. Cedric Bridger shivered. It wasn't just the cold. A strange numbness was spreading through his jaw and down his neck, a dull buzzing sensation that made his teeth feel too large for his mouth. He wiped sweat from his upper lip, his hand trembling slightly. He had swallowed some of it. Not much, but enough. The venom of a timber rattler was a potent cocktail of hemotoxins, and even a trace amount absorbed through the microcuts in his gums was playing havoc with his system. He couldn't worry about that now. He had to move Sabrina. The dust cloud he'd spotted earlier had grown into distinct shapes, 3 riders, moving with the purposeful trot of men who knew exactly where they were going. They were maybe an hour behind, tracking the hoofprints Cedric hadn't bothered to hide because he hadn't known they were being hunted. "Sabrina," Cedric rasped. He knelt beside her. She was burning up. Her skin was dry and hot, like parchment left in the sun. The swelling in her leg had turned the calf into a tight, shiny log of purple flesh, the discoloration creeping past her knee toward her thigh. If the swelling hit her hip, she'd lose the leg. If it hit her heart, she'd lose her life. "No," she moaned, thrashing against the saddlebags. "Don't sign it, Jasper. He's lying." Cedric scooped her up. She was dead weight, her head lolling against his chest, the scent of lavender soap she'd carried from street. Louis was gone, replaced by the smell of sickness and dust. He grunted with the effort, his own head swimming as he carried her toward a narrow fissure in the sandstone wall, about 50 yards up the slope. It wasn't a cave, just a crack in the earth deep enough to hide a horse and a dying woman. He laid her down on the blanket, covering her with his own duster coat. "Who is Jasper?" Cedric asked, checking the load in his Winchester again. He needed her to talk. He needed to keep her tethered to the living world. Sabrina's eyes fluttered open. In the twilight, her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the blue irises. She looked at Cedric, but she saw someone else. "Jasper Reed?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Cedric froze. Jasper Reed was a good man, a surveyor who worked out of Cheyenne. He had been found dead 2 weeks ago, ruled a suicide, shot in the head. Sabrina. Cedric grabbed her shoulders, giving her a gentle shake. Jasper Reed is dead. Everyone says he killed himself. No! Sabrina screamed, then choked it back to a sob as pain racked her body. I was there. I was in the office. Behind the screen. Hatcher came in. He didn't ask for the map. He demanded the ledger. The blue ledger. Cedric felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Bo Hatcher, the marshal. Hatcher shot him? He laughed. Sabrina wept, tears tracking through the dirt on her face. Hatcher laughed. He put the gun in Jasper's hand after he pulled the trigger. He said the railroad pays better than the law. It all clicked into place. The sudden suicides of ranchers along the Sweetwater. The land disputes settled quickly by the marshal's office. Hatcher was clearing the way for a railroad spur, murdering anyone who wouldn't sell, and pocketing the commission from the rail barons. And Sabrina Jenkins, a schoolteacher from Street Lewis coming to visit her uncle, had walked into the middle of a slaughter. I took it. Sabrina breathed, her hand clutching at her bodice. I took the ledger when he went to check the window. I ran. Cedric stared at her. She wasn't just a witness. She was the evidence. She was carrying the death warrant of the most powerful lawman in the territory. You foolish, brave girl, Cedric murmured. He stood up, his legs feeling heavy, like he was walking through water. The numbness in his face was worse. He felt a wave of nausea roll over him and had to lean against the rock wall to keep from falling. Focus, Bridger. He looked down the slope. The 3 riders were cresting the ridge. Even in the dying light, Cedric recognized the lead horse, a massive black stallion with a white blaze. Hatcher. And flanking him were 2 men Cedric knew by reputation only. Pike and Dutch. Trackers. Killers who didn't bother with badges. They pulled up at the spot where Sabrina had been bitten. Cedric watched from the shadows of the rocks above as Pike swung down from his saddle. He examined the dead snake, then looked at the blood in the dirt. Pike stood up and pointed directly at the fissure where Cedric stood hidden. They knew. Cedric looked back at Sabrina. She was shivering violently now, her teeth chattering. She needed a doctor. She needed anti-venom. And she needed a miracle. All she had was a half-poisoned cowboy and a Winchester with 6 rounds. All right then, Cedric whispered, sliding the rifle onto the rock ledge. Let's dance. Night didn't fall in the desert. It crashed down. The moon was a sliver, offering barely enough light to see the sights of a rifle. Cedric knew they wouldn't come up the slope in the dark. The loose shale was treacherous, and they'd be sitting ducks against the skyline. Hatcher was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. They would camp at the bottom, cut off the water, and wait for the sun to rise. Or they would try to creep up on foot. Cedric couldn't wait. His own body was betraying him. The dizziness came in waves now, and his left hand, the hand he used to steady the barrel, had a tremor he couldn't suppress. The venom he'd ingested was working on his nervous system. If he didn't act soon, he wouldn't be able to pull the trigger. He looked at Sabrina. She had fallen into a fitful sleep, her breathing ragged. He placed his canteen next to her hand. I'll be back, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. Cedric moved to his horse. Whiskey. The roan snorted softly, sensing his master's tension. Cedric stripped the saddle off. He needed the horse to be light. He took his lasso, a 60-foot length of braided rawhide, and tied one end to a sturdy scrub oak root near the fissure. He tied the other end to a loose boulder, balancing it precariously on the ledge. It was a crude trap, a desperate man's gamble. He slapped whiskey on the rump. Go on, boy. Get. He didn't want the horse caught in the crossfire. Whiskey hesitated, then picked his way down the backside of the ridge, away from Hatcher's camp. The sound of hooves on stone echoed in the silence. Below, a voice shouted, "They're running! Pike! Get the horses!" Cedric smiled grimly. They took the bait. They thought he was making a break for it on horseback. He watched as 2 figures mounted up and galloped toward the sound of Whiskey's retreat. That left 1 man at the fire. Hatcher. Cedric moved. He didn't go down the slope. He went up, climbing the jagged rock face above their hideout. His limbs felt heavy, his coordination sluggish. He slipped once, skinning his knuckles, biting his tongue to keep from cursing. The taste of blood mixed with the lingering metallic taste of venom. He reached a vantage point directly above the small fire Hatcher had built. The marshal was standing there, a cigar glowing in his mouth, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. Cedric raised the Winchester. The sights wavered. He blinked, trying to clear the double vision. Steady. Hatcher! Cedric's voice boomed off the canyon walls, sounding stronger than he felt. Hatcher didn't flinch. He slowly took the cigar from his mouth and looked up into the darkness. That you, Bridger? I wondered who the girl hired. You always did have a soft spot for lost causes. She's under my protection, Bo. Walk away. Hatcher laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Protection? You look at her leg, Cedric? She's dead already. I'm just here to collect her effects. A certain book she stole. You mean the proof you murdered Jasper Reed? The silence that followed was heavy. Hatcher's relaxed posture vanished. He grew rigid. You're a fool, Cedric. We're brothers, after a fashion. We both grew up hard. Why die for a dead woman? Maybe I'm tired of seeing men like you win, Cedric called back. Then die, Hatcher snarled. He drew his pistol with lightning speed and fired blindly into the rocks. The bullet sparked off the stone a foot from Cedric's head. Cedric returned fire, levering the Winchester. Bang, click, clack. Bang, click, clack. Dust kicked up around Hatcher's boots, forcing the marshal to dive behind a large boulder. Pike! Dutch! Hatcher roared into the night. Forget the horse. Flank him. Cedric realized his mistake. The two trackers hadn't gone far. They had doubled back the moment they realized the horse was riderless. Now they were climbing the ridge from both sides. Cedric was pinned. He scrambled back down toward the fissure. He had to get to Sabrina. His foot caught on a root, and his venom-weakened leg buckled. He tumbled 10 feet, slamming hard into the shale. The world spun dizzily. He lay there for a second, gasping for air, the stars above spinning in a sickening vortex. Get up. He dragged himself to the fissure. Sabrina was awake. She was sitting up, the Colt peacemaker he had left with her gripped in both hands. She was pointing it at the entrance. Cedric, she croaked. It's me, he groaned, crawling inside. They're coming. I can't walk, she said, her voice trembling but devoid of hysteria. Leave me. Take the ledger. She reached into her bodice and pulled out a small, blue-bound notebook. She shoved it toward him. Take it to the judge in Laramie. Leave me. Cedric looked at the book, then at her. He pushed her hand away gently. I ain't a postman, Sabrina, and I ain't leaving you. He grabbed the lasso he had rigged earlier, the one attached to the balanced boulder. When I say now, you shoot, Cedric ordered. Shoot what? Anything that moves that ain't me. A shadow fell across the entrance of the fissure. It was Dutch, the larger of the two trackers. He had a shotgun leveled. End of the line, Cowboy, Dutch growled. Now, Cedric yelled. Sabrina squeezed the trigger. The heavy recoil of the Colt threw her back against the rock. The bullet went wide, hitting the rock wall, but the flash and the noise startled Dutch. In that split second of distraction, Cedric yanked the rawhide rope. The boulder above the entrance, balanced on a knife's edge of gravity, tipped. It crashed down, not sealing the cave, but smashing into the ledge where Dutch was standing. The tracker yelled as the ground gave way beneath him. He fell, tumbling down the shale slope in a cloud of dust and rocks. Reload! Cedric shouted at Sabrina, grabbing his Winchester. He dragged himself to the lip of the fissure. Hatcher was down there, firing up at them. Pike was somewhere to the left, unseen. Cedric's vision was graying out at the edges. The exertion was pumping the trace venom faster through his heart. His hands were numb blocks of wood. Cedric, Sabrina screamed. He turned just in time to see Pike vaulting over the rocks into their hideout, a knife in his hand. The rifle was too long to swing in the tight space. Cedric dropped the gun and threw his body at Pike. They crashed into the back wall of the fissure. Pike was strong, fresh, and uninjured. Cedric was poisoning, exhausted, and desperate. Pike's forearm slammed into Cedric's throat, pinning him. The knife glittered in the moonlight, inching toward Cedric's chest. "Die, you trail trash," Pike hissed. Cedric gagged, his vision turning to black spots. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't push the arm away. Bang! The sound was deafening in the small space. Pike's eyes went wide. He slumped forward, his weight crushing Cedric. Cedric shoved the dead man off. Sabrina was sitting there, the smoking Colt held in two shaking hands. She looked at the body, then at Cedric. I hit him," she whispered, shock washing over her face. Cedric crawled over to her. He took the gun from her hands and checked the cylinder. 2 shots left. "You did good, Sabrina. You did good." He slumped against the wall next to her, fighting to stay conscious. Outside, the shooting had stopped. Hatcher was waiting. He knew they were trapped. He knew they were hurt. He was just going to wait for the sun to rise and finish them off. "Cedric?" Sabrina's voice was faint. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Her skin was burning hot against his arm. "Are we going to die?" Cedric reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were small, delicate, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Not tonight," Cedric lied. "Not tonight." But as he looked out at the moonlit desert, feeling the poison thrumming in his veins, he wondered if he had just made a promise he couldn't keep. The darkest hour was not a metaphor. It was a physical weight pressing against the sandstone walls. The moon had vanished behind the western peaks, leaving the canyon in a suffocating ink-black silence. Inside the fissure, the air was thick with the copper smell of blood from Pike's body, which Cedric had dragged to the far corner. Sabrina sat propped against the wall, the fever having burned down to a low, dangerous simmer. She wasn't shivering anymore. She was unnaturally still. Cedric struck a match to check her leg. The flame flared, casting long, dancing shadows against the rock. The purple discoloration had stopped spreading just below her hip bone. The tourniquet and the suction had bought her time, but the poison was still a slow-moving tide in her blood. "You look terrible," Sabrina whispered. Her voice was husky, stripped of the fear that had paralyzed her earlier. Cedric chuckled, but it turned into a cough that rattled his chest. He wiped his mouth. The back of his hand came away speckled with red. "I've been better. Had a bad steak in Abilene once. This feels about the same." Sabrina reached out, her cool fingers touching his swollen lip. She frowned, her brow furrowing as realization dawned on her. "Your lip, your hands are shaking. You swallowed it. You swallowed the venom for me. Don't go making me out to be a saint, Sabrina. I just didn't want to lose my $50. Liar," she said softly. She didn't pull her hand away. "Why? You could have ridden away. You saw the snake. You knew the risk." Cedric leaned his head back against the stone, closing his eyes. The dizziness was a constant companion now, a humming vibration in his skull. My old man used to say a man's worth ain't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to throw away. I reckon I didn't have much to lose. "You have your life," she insisted. "Not much of a life," Cedric murmured. "Just a trail of dust and bad debts." From the darkness below, a voice drifted up, carried by the canyon acoustics. It was Hatcher. "You in there reminiscing, little brother?" Sabrina stiffened. She looked at Cedric, her eyes wide. "Brother?" Cedric sighed, a sound of deep, ancient exhaustion. "Half-brother, same father, different mothers. Hatcher got the name and the land. I got the door." "He didn't tell me," Sabrina said, looking at the man who had saved her with new eyes. "He's a monster. And you're his blood. Blood don't make you family, Sabrina. It just makes you related." Cedric checked the Winchester. He had 3 rounds left. The Colt had 2. 5 bullets against a marshal, and whatever trickery he had up his sleeve. "He won't leave," Cedric said, shifting the topic. "Bo is a pit bull. Once he bites, he locks his jaw. When the sun comes up, he's coming up that scree slope. He knows I'm sick. He can probably hear it in my voice. What do we do? Sabrina asked. She tried to move her leg and gasped. The pain was blinding. I'm going to go down there, Cedric said, struggling to his feet. He had to use the wall for support. I'll draw his fire. You keep the Colt. If he gets past me, don't hesitate. Aim for the chest. No. Sabrina grabbed his belt, hauling him back down. You can barely stand. He'll cut you down before you take 2 steps. I ain't got a choice, darlin'. We wait, she commanded, her voice gaining a steely edge. We have the high ground. Let him come to us. Cedric looked at her. The city girl was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the fire of the red desert. He sat back down, sliding his arm around her shoulders to keep her warm. Or perhaps to keep himself upright. All right, he agreed. We wait. They sat in the dark, 2 broken people holding onto the edge of the world. Cedric felt his heart stutter, a chaotic rhythm caused by the toxin. He focused on Sabrina's breathing. In, out, in, out. It was the only clock that mattered. If we get out of this, Sabrina whispered, leaning her head on his chest. I'm going to burn that blue dress. I'll buy you a new one, Cedric promised. Red, bright red. Deal. The sky to the east began to bleed gray, then violet. The dawn was coming, and with it, the end of the truce. The sun didn't rise gently. It crested the horizon like a muzzle flash, blinding and sudden. The golden light flooded the canyon, illuminating every crevice, every rock, every drop of dried blood on the shale. Cedric blinked, his eyes gritty and burning. He forced himself to focus. The fever in his blood had settled into a cold, heavy lead in his limbs. His reflexes were shot. Wake up, he nudged Sabrina. She was already awake, staring at the entrance of the fissure. She had the Colt gripped in both hands, resting on her knees. Where is he? She asked. As if in answer, a bullet sparked off the rock face inches from Cedric's ear, spraying them with stone fragments. The crack of the rifle echoed seconds later. Cedric threw himself flat, dragging Sabrina down. Stay low. Hatcher was firing from behind a cluster of boulders at the base of the slope, about 80 yards away. He had a Sharp's buffalo rifle, a weapon with range and power that made Cedric's Winchester look like a toy. He's pinning us, Cedric yelled over the ringing in his ears. He's going to keep our heads down while he moves up. Another shot pulverized the edge of the fissure entrance. Hatcher was a marksman. He wasn't wasting lead. He was dissecting their cover. Cedric rolled onto his stomach and crawled to the edge. He spotted a flash of movement. Hatcher was moving, darting from rock to rock, closing the distance. He was fast for a big man. Cedric raised the Winchester. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. The front sight danced left and right. He held his breath, tried to squeeze the trigger. Bang! The bullet kicked up dirt 5 feet to Hatcher's left. A miss. A bad miss. Damn it, Cedric cursed. The venom had stolen his aim. Hatcher laughed from below. Getting shaky, Colt? That poison eating your brain yet? Hatcher fired again. The heavy slug slammed into the rock wall inside the fissure, ricocheting with a terrifying whine. Cedric looked at Sabrina. She was terrified, but she wasn't crying. She was watching him. I can't hit him, Cedric admitted, the shame burning hotter than the fever. My hands. I can't steady the barrel. Then give it to me, Sabrina said. Cedric looked at her. Sabrina, that kick will dislocate your shoulder. Give it to me, she snapped. Cedric handed her the Winchester. She struggled to lift the heavy weapon, resting the barrel on a ledge of rock. She pressed the stock against her shoulder, wincing as the movement pulled at the snakebite on her leg. He's moving up the left side, Cedric directed, peering through a crack in the rocks, behind that dead cedar. Sabrina squinted against the sun. I see him. Wait for him to move. Don't rush. Below, Hatcher broke cover, sprinting toward the final ascent. He was 50 yards out. Sabrina pulled the trigger. The rifle roared. The recoil slammed her backward, but she held on. Down on the slope, Hatcher stumbled. His hat flew off. He dove behind a slab of sandstone. Did I get him? Sabrina gasped, rubbing her bruised shoulder. "You took his hat off," Cedric said, a grin breaking through his pain. "You scared the hell out of him." But Hatcher didn't stay pinned for long. "Nice try, school teacher," he yelled. "But you're out of ammo, brother." Cedric checked his pockets. Empty. Sabrina had fired the last rifle round. They had 2 shots in the Colt Peacemaker, and Hatcher was coming up the final 30 yards. "This is it," Cedric said. He pulled Sabrina back into the shadows of the fissure. "He's gonna come through that opening. When he does, he'll look for me. I'm gonna rush him." "Cedric, no. You have no weapon." "I have a knife." Cedric pulled the blade from his boot. "And I have the element of being stupid enough to try it. You hide in the corner. If he drops me, you put the gun to his head, and you end it." "Cedric, promise me, Sabrina," he roared, grabbing her arms. "I promise," she sobbed. Heavy boots crunched on the loose shale just outside. Hatcher was here. Cedric braced himself against the wall. His legs felt like jelly. His vision was tunneling. He focused on the entrance, on the rectangle of blinding blue sky. A shadow fell across the light. Cedric didn't wait. He launched himself forward with a feral cry. The knife raised. Hatcher stepped into the fissure, the buffalo rifle discarded, his own revolver drawn. He saw Cedric coming. He didn't panic. He just stepped aside and brought the barrel of his gun down hard on Cedric's skull. Crack. Cedric's world exploded in white light, then darkness. He hit the ground hard, the knife skittering away. He tried to rise, but his limbs wouldn't obey. He was paralyzed, watching the scene through a haze of pain. Hatcher stood over him, breathing hard. He looked down at Cedric with a sneer. Always were the slow one, Colt. Hatcher cocked the hammer of his revolver, aiming it directly between Cedric's eyes. "Say hello to Daddy for me." Cedric closed his eyes, waiting for the thunder. Click. The sound of a hammer being pulled back. But it wasn't Hatcher's gun. Hatcher froze. "Drop it," Sabrina's voice rang out. Clear. Cold. Hatcher turned his head slowly. Sabrina was propped up against the far wall. She held the heavy Colt Peacemaker with both hands, her elbows locked, the barrel steady as a rock. It was pointed at Hatcher's heart. "Well now," Hatcher smiled, lowering his gun slightly but not dropping it. "Look at you. The little school teacher thinks she can kill a man." "I'm not a teacher today," Sabrina said. "I'm a survivor. You won't pull that trigger, darling. You don't have the grit." Hatcher began to turn fully toward her, raising his gun. Cedric tried to shout, tried to move, but his voice was a choked gurgle. Hatcher's finger tightened on his trigger. Sabrina didn't blink. She didn't hesitate. She remembered the snake. She remembered the ledger. She remembered Cedric sucking the poison from her veins. She squeezed. Blam. The shot was deafening in the confined space. Hatcher looked surprised. He looked down at his chest. A bloom of red was spreading rapidly across his white shirt, dead center. He looked back at Sabrina, his mouth opening to speak, but no sound came out. He crumpled backward, falling out of the fissure and tumbling down the slope he had just climbed. Silence rushed back into the canyon, louder than the gunshot. Cedric lay on the floor, staring at Sabrina. She was still holding the gun, smoke curling from the barrel. She lowered it slowly, then let it drop to the dirt. She slumped forward, the adrenaline leaving her body, the fever reclaiming her. "Cedric," she whispered into the silence. "I'm here," he rasped, dragging himself toward her inch by painful inch. "I'm here." "Sabrina." He reached her and pulled her into his arms. They sat there in the dust and the blood, holding on to each other as the sun climbed higher, indifferent to the violence it illuminated. They were alive, against all odds, against nature and man. They were alive, but the desert wasn't done with them yet. The silence in the high desert was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the canyon floor. It was amplified by the ringing aftermath of the gunshot, a high-pitched whine that refused to fade from Cedric Bridger's ears. For a long time, neither he nor Sabrina moved. They sat huddled in the dust of the fissure, the air around them thick with the acrid, sulphurous smell of burnt gunpowder and the copper tang of blood. Below them, on the jagged rocks of the slope, lay the broken body of Beau Hatcher. The man who had been a marshal, a brother, and a monster was now just carrion waiting for the sun. Cedric was the first to stir. The blow to his head from Hatcher's pistol had left him with a concussive haze that made the canyon walls swim every time he blinked. He tried to take a deep breath, but his ribs protested with a sharp, stabbing pain. The venom he had ingested, however small the amount was, still ghosting through his system, leaving his limbs feeling heavy and his fingers numb. "Sabrina?" he rasped. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. She looked up slowly. Her face was a map of their ordeal, streaked with gray dust, dried tears, and the soot of the weapon she had fired. She looked wild, shattered, and entirely magnificent. She stared at her hands, then at the empty holster on Cedric's hip, then finally at his eyes. The realization of what she had done was settling onto her shoulders, heavy as a yoke. She hadn't just survived. She had taken a life to do it. "He's gone," she whispered, the words barely audible. "He's gone," Cedric confirmed gently. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and took the heavy Colt Peacemaker from her limp fingers. He checked the cylinder, spent, and holstered it. "We can't stay here, Sabrina. The bodies will draw vultures, and in this territory, vultures draw eyes we don't need." "I can't walk," she said. It wasn't a complaint, nor a plea for pity. It was a cold, hard fact. Cedric looked at her leg. The makeshift tourniquet and his desperate surgery had bought her time, but the battle wasn't won. The swelling was severe, the skin tight and hot to the touch, a sickly discoloration spreading just below her knee. The poison was still fighting a war inside her blood, and without a doctor, she would lose that war before another sunset. "I know," Cedric said, gritting his teeth against his own dizziness. He forced himself to stand, using the rough sandstone wall to climb hand over hand until he was upright. The world tilted on its axis. He waited for the horizon to steady itself. "We need the horse." He stumbled to the opening of the fissure, shielding his eyes against the glare of the morning sun. He whistled a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the dry, stagnant air. He waited. A minute passed, stretching like an hour. Despair began to creep in, a cold worm in his gut. If whiskey had bolted for the open range, they were dead. Then, a soft nickering came from the scrub oak below. The massive roan gelding stepped out from behind a cluster of boulders, picking his way carefully over the debris of the rockfall. The horse's ears twitched, sensing the change in the air, the absence of the threat. "Good boy," Cedric breathed, relief washing over him so intensely his knees almost buckled. Getting down the slope was a nightmare of mechanics and pain. Cedric practically carried Sabrina, his boots sliding treacherously on the loose shale. Every step sent jolts of agony through his battered body, and every movement wrung a gasp of pain from Sabrina. By the time they reached the bottom, Cedric's shirt was soaked through with sweat, and his vision was graying at the edges. He lifted her into the saddle. She was terrifyingly light, her strength sapped by the fever. She slumped forward, gripping the pommel with white-knuckled desperation. Cedric mounted behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist to take the reins. She leaned back against his chest, her fever heat seeping into him, burning through his duster. "Where are we going?" she murmured, her voice slurring with exhaustion. Her eyes were half closed, lulled by the rhythm of the horse. "Laramie," Cedric said, turning Whiskey's head east toward the distant gap in the mountains. "We're gonna finish this." The ride to Laramie took 2 days, but in Cedric's memory, it would always exist as a singular, unending fever dream. The first day was a trial of heat. The sun was a hammer, beating down on them without mercy. Cedric kept talking to keep them both anchored to the living world. He told her stories about his childhood in Montana, about the way the sweetgrass smelled in the spring rain, about the horses he had broken and the ones that had broken him. He talked until his throat was raw, just to hear her breathe, just to feel the slight rise and fall of her chest against his. "Keep your eyes open, Sabrina." He would jostle her gently when her head lolled too far. "Tell me about the schoolhouse. Tell me about the books. History," she mumbled, drifting in and out of consciousness. I teach them. About heroes. Real heroes don't wear capes, Cedric. They wear dust. The night was worse. The desert stripped away its heat and replaced it with a bone-gnawing cold. They camped in a dry wash, huddling together under the single blanket. Cedric didn't sleep. He couldn't. He spent the hours pressing his hand to her forehead, checking the pulse in her neck, terrified that the silence of the desert would claim her in the dark. By the second afternoon, Laramie appeared on the horizon not as a salvation, but as a mirage shimmering in the heat waves. Cedric was barely conscious himself. The trace venom had wrecked his digestion and left his nerves firing randomly. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the reins. When they finally rode into the main street of Laramie, the town fell silent. They looked like ghosts dredged up from a shallow grave. Cedric Bridger, his face bruised and swollen, his clothes torn and stained with dried blood. Sabrina, pale as death, her leg bound in dirty rags, slumped against him like a broken doll. A woman on the boardwalk dropped her basket of apples. A group of miners outside the saloon stopped their drinking to stare. The piano player inside paused. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic clop-clop of whiskey's hooves on the hard-packed dirt. They didn't stop at the doctor's office. Cedric steered the horse straight to the courthouse. He slid off the horse, his legs buckling as they hit the ground. He caught himself on the hitching post, gasping for air. He reached up and pulled Sabrina down, catching her weight. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open. "We're here," Cedric whispered into her hair. "Walk with me, Sabrina, one last time." Supporting her, he half-dragged, half-carried her up the wooden steps. Judge Harlan was a stern man, a pillar of law in a lawless land, known for his bushy gray mustache and his intolerance for nonsense. He was reviewing paperwork when the doors banged open. He looked up, annoyed, but the expression froze on his face. "Bridger?" The judge stood up, knocking his chair back. "What in God's name happened to you?" Sabrina pulled away from Cedric's support. For a moment, she swayed, looking as if a breeze would knock her over. But then, she straightened her spine. She reached into her torn, dust-stained bodice and pulled out the small blue ledger. It was battered. It was stained with sweat and the dirt of the red desert. But it was the truth. She stepped forward and slammed it onto the judge's polished oak desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Marshall Hatcher is dead," Sabrina announced. Her voice cracked, dry as parchment, but it carried a steel that silenced the clerk in the corner. "He killed Jasper Reed. He killed the prospectors. He tried to kill us." She pointed a trembling finger at the book. "It's all in there. Every ounce of stolen gold, every bribe from the railroad, every drop of blood." The judge looked at the book, then at the woman standing before him, no longer a schoolteacher, but a survivor forged in fire. He looked at Cedric, who was leaning against the doorframe, keeping guard even as his strength failed. Harlan opened the book. He read the first page. His face went pale. "Get the doctor," the judge barked to his clerk, his voice tight. Now, as the clerk scrambled out the door, the adrenaline that had held Sabrina upright finally evaporated. Her knees gave way. "Sabrina!" Cedric lunged forward, catching her just before she hit the floor. He sank down with her, cradling her head in his lap. The room was beginning to spin violently. The faces of the judge and the arriving bailiff were blurring into gray smudges. "We made it," Cedric whispered, his hand brushing the hair from her fever-damp forehead. "We beat the devil, Sabrina." She smiled, a faint, fleeting thing, before her eyes rolled back. And then, the darkness took them both. 4 years later, Montana Territory. The winter snow lay thick on the valley floor, a pristine white blanket that stretched all the way to the jagged foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains. The air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. Cedric Bridger stood on the porch of a sturdy, hand-built log cabin, his breath misting in the cold morning light. He was stacking firewood in the rack. He moved with a slight, permanent limp, a hitch in his step that was the only visible reminder of the long ride to Laramie. He was filled out now, the gauntness of the trail replaced by the muscle of hard work and good food. The heavy wooden door opened behind him, spilling golden light and the rich aroma of coffee into the chill. Sabrina stepped out. She was wrapped in a heavy wool coat, but beneath the hem, a flash of bright red fabric was visible. She walked to the railing, her movement fluid and strong, though she favored her right leg just a little. She handed him a steaming tin mug. "You're gonna freeze out here, cowboy." Cedric smiled, taking the cup. The warmth seeped into his gloves. He wrapped his free arm around her waist, pulling her close. She leaned into him, solid and real, fitting against his side as if she had been made for that exact spot. "Just thinking," he said, looking out over the paddock where Whiskey was grazing on a patch of hay, his coat thick and shaggy for the winter. "About what?" Sabrina asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "About snakes," he chuckled softly. "And luck." Sabrina looked down at her leg. Even through the fabric, she knew the map that was written on her skin. The scar was there, a jagged pucker of white flesh on her calf that would never tan, never fade. It was ugly. It was beautiful. It was the mark of the day she had almost died, and the day she had truly started living. "We didn't have luck, Cedric," she said, softy, looking up at him. Her eyes were still the color of a stormy sky, but the fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable peace. "We had grit, and we had each other." Cedric tightened his arm around her. The nightmare of the Red Desert felt like a story from another life, a tale told in hushed tones in the saloons of Cheyenne. Hatcher was a ghost. The ledger had brought down a corruption ring that stretched all the way to Denver, changing the territory forever. But none of that mattered as much as the quiet morning in this valley. "You reckon the pass is clear?" Cedric asked, nodding toward the mountains. "Why?" "Thinking about riding into town. Get you some more of that fancy lavender soap. Maybe a new ribbon." Sabrina laughed, the sound bright and clear, ringing off the snow-laden trees. "I think I'm done with fancy things, Cedric Bridger. I have everything I need right here." Cedric kissed her forehead. They stood together, watching the sun crest the peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and fire. They were survivors, they were partners, and in the vast, wild silence of the West, that was the only law that mattered. And that, folks, is the legend of the Laramie Trail. From a deadly snakebite in the dust to a showdown with a corrupt marshal, Cedric and Sabrina proved that sometimes the strongest medicine isn't in a bottle, it's in the will to survive for the person standing beside you. They walked through the fire and came out the other side, not unscathed, but together. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the unforgiving Wild West. It's a reminder that even when the venom is in your veins and the odds are stacked against you, you don't stop fighting until the sun goes down. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more gritty, real-life Western dramas. Share this video with a friend who appreciates a story about survival and justice. And most importantly, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I have another story coming next week about a gold miner who found something much darker than ore in the deep shafts of Colorado. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next trail.